everyone. Yeah, Carl, can you hear me over there? Okay, perfect. That sounds good. And you joined right on time and welcoming everyone once again to episode 13. And like I always say, this is the podcast where we talk about the part of everyone's career that you are not going to find on their LinkedIn page. And today I'm very excited because we're going to be talking about a topic that I'm really passionate about and a topic that is a bit misunderstood. And I thought it wise to also bring someone that has actually walked the path and not just someone that is talking about it to also share their experience from real life, real life scenarios. And today we are going to be talking about like starting and building your career without a college degree. And this is like it's like a hot topic out there, and everyone has an opinion around it. Everyone has something to say about it. But then I thought it would be nice to actually bring in someone. I think Kao is trying to join back. Thought it would be nice to actually bring in someone that has actually gone through that path or is currently walking that path. So on today's episode 13 of my career chronicles with James Udom, we'll be talking about starting your career with without a college degree. And my guest for today is Carl Saetern. A little bit about Carl Saetern. Carl Saetern works with Amazon as an account manager. And prior to Amazon, he was with Aston Carter, works with the Fastener company. He has been in the supply chain space for quite, I think, maybe up to like almost 7 years now. And Carl is someone trying to get him on board again. Hi, Carl.
I don't know if you cut out or if I cut out. That was I don't. Okay, then yeah, everything should be good. My Wi-Fi didn't disconnect. That was interesting. Sorry about that.
It's fine. And okay, and then good to have you back and confirm you can hear me loud and clear. Okay, so I was just telling everyone that, the whole idea of starting a career without a college degree is like a hot topic out there, and there are so many debates for and against. I am on neither side. I am on neither side. I'm not going to be the judge here, but the best bet for me was to bring in someone who has actually walked that path and is actually still walking that path to share their experience. That way we can be able to find like a very good pathway forward. And giving a shout out to everyone joining us from whichever part of the world you're joining us from: Asia, America, Africa, Australia, wherever you're joining us from. You can just leave your comments there with your name and where you're joining us from. And like we typically do it here, you're welcome to drop your question and at any time, and then Carl or myself, we're going to jump on that question and just address it as we go. And that's it. And Carl, if you're ready, I am ready, and we can get started. Are you?
We had that little Wi-Fi mishap early. That during I don't know what happened there, but yeah, I'm ready.
So let's get into the business of the day. And I try to start this very conventional, and my first conventional question is always the question of tell us about growing up. I mean, that interview question of tell us about yourself. But this time,
Those questions, man.
but this time around, I don't offer for you. So, but just tell us
No
about your
job
child.
offer. Man, growing up, so I was born in 1996 in Vallejo, California. So, growing up, parents were first generation immigrant, had just immigrated from, I believe it was Thailand at the time. My parents were fairly young having me. So, man, growing up was fun, man. I was a very playful kid. Um, when you talk about the grades perspective, I don't think I did very much homework. I think I was playing a bit more than doing schoolwork. And then, my family stayed a bit of time in Vallejo, California, and then eventually, after a couple more moves, I ended up in Sacramento, where I live the majority of my adult life now. Um, yeah, then just I stuck in California for such a long period of time, and then eventually getting my first career there, at where we joined together in Fastenal at some point, and yeah, and then eventually a couple more years. and a couple roles, and ended up in Seattle over here at Amazon.
The most part of your life, how early did you start working? Like, how was maybe your first official working career experience, kind of? Yeah.
So as a supply chain associate for Fastenal. Back in June of 2017 was the very first paid role I had in my career, and it was very fun because at the time, I'm a young college kid. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm actually studying software engineering at the time. Not sure if I wanted to stay in that path because I was at community college at the time. I was actually struggling getting my math and computer science courses because I had to take my general ed courses and just I couldn't find any openings for math and computer science courses my first almost 6 semesters of college. First 5 semesters of community college. I just couldn't get it. Maybe it was just my bad luck, but couldn't ever find the opportunity. But actually, finding my first role at Fastenal was actually very impactful for my career back in 2017 because, first of all, I love building and I love the process of supply chain in general. Just kind of where you see where a product comes from, where it goes to, and how it helps that given company, business, or individual person. So I actually stuck around at Fastenal for a total of 5 years. So my first 4 years from 2017 through 2021 was primarily as a supply chain associate, where we worked on organizing the storefront to inventory cycle counting the warehouse. Then eventually, we worked at the time. Fastenal worked with walk-in customers, so we dealt a little bit with the B2C side. Selling to everyday mom and pop shop or someone just, hey, I need a bag of nuts and bolts for whatever I'm working on. To hey, eventually, a customer like Siemens, for example, might come by and hey, I want $20,000 worth of Milwaukee tools. How soon can you get it to me? Oh, well, based off of what were our current availability in our hubs, we can get it to you X day. So it was quite fun. And as I got more tenured as a supply chain associate, I eventually started going on some small cold calls with my general managers at the time, which I worked with a variety over my career, which is quite interesting. That's also helped me learn that while I liked sales, I didn't want it as a primary responsibility. So it's quite interesting. I think that's something that's very good that people should identify very early in their career. I think people are always trying to search for what I like to do as opposed to identifying first what they don't like. I think that's always a big plus because it's quite easy. You typically know what you don't like, but sometimes as people, when they identify certain criterias for certain roles or responsibilities or maybe the future of the role, they might find out that, hey, I kind of like this. I initially thought I wouldn't, but I do. So I think that's something I always emphasize.
To kind of take you back a bit, and this is you're done with high school and then you gain admission to go to a college and then study software engineering, and then at some point after I don't know how many semesters you're like, okay, I think this is not working, let me go and do something else. So what was that point like? What really happened? Was it that maybe you couldn't afford to pay your fees again, or your parents were not supporting again, or you were just like, okay, this is not for me, or you were just like, okay, let me take a pause and go try something else and then I will be back? I want to really know what transpired between the point you were like, okay, you know what, I am done, or were you just done?
We talk about this. So I graduated high school in May of 2014. So obviously, in America, we just immediately started applying for community colleges. So I immediately started community college that given fall of 2014. So when I initially started, again, I thought software engineering was really cool at the time. I thought that was something that I could just build my career on. But then I didn't, I don't know anything about college at the time. I didn't realize there was general ed and other non-math and computer science courses I needed to take. So my first semester, I couldn't get a single math course or a single computer science course. So I'm taking like philosophy, economy, I'm taking, general ed, speaking, things like that. And I think I think it was either I think it was 4 semesters. My mistake. 4 semesters. So my first 2 years of community college, I couldn't get a single computer science course, and it took me 3 semesters to get my first general math course at the given time. At least that I could find that was for my path to transfer into university. So as I kept going through the kind of general, just going to community college and just kind of being bored, not working at the time, because my parents very heavily emphasized going to college and getting my degree. You know, typical Asian parents household, and not working. And then after about 3 years of that, in 2017, I was thinking like, man, I can't take this, community college stuff anymore. Like, I feel like I'm not even paying attention in some of my classes, to be honest. I feel like I'm not performing well, and it could just be honestly just me being lazy at the time. That could have been it, but my interest, I can guarantee you, was not there. I loved learning. I hated being in the college classroom. So I wanted to get a part-time job to maybe refocus me. So I started applying everywhere to any type of role, right? And I saw Fastenal was available for a supply chain associate. And I always thought supply chain was interesting because whenever I thought about any business, I kind of tried to think of the big picture, how it flows, how it makes money, how it gets its product, what makes a company successful. And then I always thought supply chain was pretty interesting at the time. So essentially, I just applied. Luckily, I was able to get the role that eventually kickstarted my whole career. And then since I knew I loved learning so much, and I finally get paid for a role now, I was asking questions left and right. And eventually over time it pulled me away from college, essentially. I was only kind of sticking in community college for my parents at that point. I had zero interest, and I could tell it was affecting my importance because I honestly just dropped out of certain courses mid semester. Sometimes I wouldn't even attend some of my lectures. And then eventually I had to choose between both, between either or, sticking to community college or going to just continuing my working career. And then eventually around I believe it was 2019, after again 5 years of on and off community college, right, which I should have been done at that point. I was like, I'm absolutely wasting my time. Let me just drop out and completely focus on work. And man, when I dropped out, oh boy! And then the parents found out. They thought I was going to end up homeless, man. They thought that I was potentially throwing away my working career and my future at the time. But I reassured them that I had a plan, and I was extremely confident. I knew exactly the skill sets I want to learn. I knew I did as much research as I can to where roles like this can lead to in my career. Also, in my current company at Fast at the time, where I could promote into some of the companies I've worked with, because I eventually go work with them. But yes, it was just I was just no longer interested in community college and just college in general. But I was so interested in learning that once I started working, honestly, my care for college immediately died down.
Something interesting here. So it feels like you started college, and then along the line, you're like, okay, this seems to be going everywhere and nowhere. Let me try the world of work. And then you took up work while still in college. And then along the line, you had to like choose which one has to go, because you're like, okay, I cannot give half attention here and half attention there. I need to find one of them and give full attention. And then by your judgment, work was the one you decided to give your full attention to. So, what I want to understand here is, was there any point in time you were not so confident in that decision? And, how were you able to like navigate that path? Because you're like, this is like you have parents who are telling you this is the way you need to go. And then you on your own, you're like, okay, I want to focus on the world of work and then just dish school. Was there any point in time you were not so confident in that decision? And then what were the things that kept you going in the path that you believe was the right path for you at the time, which was the world of work?
Ever a time I doubted my decision? Not necessarily, simply because the amount of time I spent debating between dropping out of college. I had thought through so many situations. I had done honestly multiple months and years of research what I wanted to do and kind of paving out a plan that honestly there wasn't too much doubt in my end. But was I nervous about dropping out? Yes, I was nervous. But I had enough confidence that I had a job that I could go full time into or eventually promote into, but also I had good general managers I can learn from. I'm in the age of the internet to where I can use internet as much for tools and research as possible. So I think I had everything at my disposal, but I also had the drive to kind of get better and keep learning. So if you ask me if there was any doubt, not very much, if at all. But was I nervous? Yes, absolutely. I was absolutely nervous. didn't mention to you is that during high school, during my curriculum, we actually had a class you can take as what they call a TA, a teacher's assistant. And I got my first class as a teacher's assistant, not for a teacher, but actually for the library. So it was actually perfect. I did that for a few semesters between my sophomore and junior year, so year 10 and year 11, to where it was actually very basic, but we would check in, check out books. We would essentially cycle count, make sure books weren't missing. And when it was time for students to get their books or return their books, we would make sure, hey, student, Ashley, whoever this person is, you're checking out this book, but also note that you have this given book overdue. So it was very basics of inventory management and supply chain at that point, right? So it was very basic. And then you would tell the students their overdue charges for the given books or books that they're missing, books that maybe if the student wasn't there that day, you would notate to the teacher that, hey, that this given student was absent this day, that they would need to return their books on a given time. Otherwise, the parents would get a charge or a fine or an email or something along those lines. But yeah, I actually did that from primarily the end of my year 10, and then a couple semesters in year 11 and a semester or two in my senior year. So it was actually quite fun. It was a good way to kind of learn that, socialize a little bit, but also to get some other homework done. So that was actually something I put primarily on my resume to apply for my first FAFSA job. It's like, this somewhat relates to supply chain. I'm a kid with no experience, but I don't know what I'm doing. But it was actually it was very relatable actually, and how it helped during my very entry days, my very first couple of days at Fastenal. So that's something that I used to actually get into and apply to my first Fastenal role.
Interesting, yeah, because I mean, I know there is always like this springboard that's, your basis, and I'm so excited to even learn about this that, oh, you were able to like leverage on what you did even in high school, and that sort of form like a basis, and then you can sort of just go from there. Let's talk about mentors and maybe teachers and maybe counselors and maybe managers. What's your general sentiment around that, and how do you see that influencing your career so far all the way up until this point, especially as someone that has been building your career without a college degree, which is like the conventional way? So what role has mentors, maybe great managers, teachers, what role have they played all along on this journey?
Always ask, what drove you to that situation? What made you want to do a career change? Was there any failures that made it driven you that way, or was there a primary success that once you attained it, you knew you wanted to lead that pathway, for example? So I was always very curious. Probably to an annoying degree, but I asked a ton of questions because I was, so excited to kind of find out and learn more about people. And then as I got further into my working career, I had obviously general managers that had significantly more working experience than myself. So it'd always be, the process of things. Why are we doing it? How does that affect our business? Is it profitable? Do we do it just because, or is there an actual reason why? And I feel like sometimes, especially when it comes from a younger, fresh perspective or an inexperienced perspective, when you ask certain people more tenured questions, I think that it kind of jogs them back, if you get me, or maybe it's a fresh perspective that they haven't thought about at that time, or maybe they haven't thought about it in a long time. And that just leads to amazing conversation, in my opinion. So I've done that my whole, adult life, my working life. I'm sure I pestered you for questions about things in your background, and it creates amazing conversation. And I learn so much from it because I hold it to such a high degree when someone's able to answer me genuinely.
Oh, yeah, that's so good to hear. And so something I always love to talk about is like, I mean, we all know that conventionally, when you have like a college degree, that is like the basis from where people evaluate you. But your path is quite unconventional. So my question to you right now is, have you ever been in a situation or in a room where people doubted your capacity because you don't have a college degree? And then what way were you able to prove yourself? Because I feel like at every point in time, you have to prove yourself. But people that already have a college degree, technically, that can be like the proof they need that, oh, you know what? I have a college degree in supply chain. So that means I'm qualified for an entry level supply chain role. But for you, what have you been leveraging on to prove yourself that, oh, even though I don't have this is what I have? And how do you navigate? How have you been navigating situations like that so far?
So there would always be questions about maybe why I dropped out or if there was a significant cause. But to be honest with you, the people I've worked with, I've been pretty blessed in my life, and had really good backing. That honestly, a majority of people that I've worked with didn't care or question it at all. To be honest, there was zero care. Luckily for me, actually, where unfortunately where the whether or not I have a degree gets counted the most, would be job applications, right, James? We've all done job applications to where you need to apply a degree and select whether or not you have a degree. And I would always click the menu and drop all the way down to try to find the high school degree if it was available. And it's funny that you mentioned that. So it was never my peers. It was mainly those job application websites, man, where it may not even have high school degrees an option, but that selection is required. So it's like, oh, okay, I'm pretty much excluded from this role. If I don't get a chance to, contact the hiring manager and things like that. But luckily, in my professional working career, whether or not I had a degree mattered very little. It was more so to a certain degree when I tried applying for new roles or getting into new fields where a degree obviously will have an impact depending on the level of role. But even then, I've gotten offers for roles, even for Amazon, for example, where I did not have a degree, but I heavily emphasized my working background and experience with Amazon on the FC level, where I had a significant working experience with them. So it's honestly just trying to relate, heavily emphasize the skills you have that showcase why you would be a good candidate for a given role, and eventually the degree will matter slightly less. Slightly less.
If you were to recommend today, what will you? By the way, big shout out to everyone who is joining us live. Like I said earlier, feel free to tell us where you're joining from and your name. Also, if you have any question for Carl, you can put it up there at any point in time. He's going to address those questions at any point in time in this show. We can always break to take care of your questions. So thank you for joining us live. So Carl, I wanted you to talk about like how do you think that people without a college degree can demonstrate their capacity? Because at every point in time, I feel like you need to show capacity to be able to do this job even without a college degree. So, how do you show capacity, and how do you recommend like people that are following your path should also demonstrate such capacity to be able to perform at their job, maybe during the hiring process or during the interview process, before you even get to the job? Or I feel like even during the job, everybody will like, okay, maybe this guy without the college degree is about to be the one who does not know what he's doing, when technically that might never ever be the case. But what's your recommendation about for people in that path? How do you recommend they demonstrate capacity to deliver even when they don't have like a college degree?
Having a college degree doesn't impact your ability to learn. So we'll go with that. Everyone has a capacity to learn to a certain degree and get better at certain things. So we'll first set that down in line. But I would recommend to anyone that with that, if you know for a fact that at least in the near future you're not going back for your degree, you need to identify key skill sets required within your field within your field in general, whether it's understanding logistics, sales, supply chain, understanding data. Okay, if we're using data, what specific potential languages and tools are heavily used in my field. You need to identify those skill sets required for your field because a lot of them you can actually learn on your own. We're in the age of the internet. There's a lot of things we can practice and simulate on our own at home, whether it's through free courses, through YouTube, or just trial and error on your own for tools like that. So there's a lot that you can learn that'll give you or relate to professional experience that's required. So that's my recommendation to anyone, that if you know, again, for a fact that you're not going for a college degree in your near future, you need to identify the most important 5 skill sets or tools that's required in your field, and you need to learn those as much as possible within your own home or outside of any professional setting. And then you need to identify, I would call them foot in the door roles, essentially, right? Maybe roles that you can go into for a year or two, that you can potentially just get your door into a certain field. So, for example, as a supply chain associate at Fastline, I knew that could kind of open up my world to a lot of things. For example, if I want to go strictly into sales, or whether I want to go to strictly into procurement, or if I want to specialize primarily in logistics, for example, things like that. I knew that as I was working the role, I identified key skills and key kind of daily tasks and day-to-day work requirements of the role, that I knew that if it was to spread out to a different company, how could I utilize those given skill sets and into different roles in different companies and industries. And then I heavily focused on them. I tried to learn them as much as possible, ask as much questions from, my given company's specialists at the time, to have, 10 plus years of experience for that given skill set or experience. And I learned and picked their brain as much as I could, and kind of expanded my skill set from there, even if it wasn't required for my day-to-day tasks.
I am curious. So those are like some of the things that, and interestingly, these are not typically skills that are learned in school. These are like skills you build by yourself, you grow into it, you decide to go for those things. Okay, if you were hiring today, apart from college degree, or if you were hiring someone without a college degree, what would you be looking out for?
Relatable experience. Have they handled any projects, experience, or anything that's related to the role? Um, they're, for example, let's, and then you also have to go for metrics of success to a certain degree, right? Have they, won any awards? Is there anything emphasized in the resume that really sticks out? Did they save a significant amount of money for, a given project, or have they reached a certain sales dollar amount? Depending on the role, right? We would like to see metrics and kind of key points of interest where it may relate to the role significantly, or maybe shows that employees scope of responsibility or success at that standpoint. So honestly, if I was hiring, would a degree matter to a certain point? Yes, but it shouldn't be the deciding factor for, let's say, some more general roles. So I think key points of success, ownership, would probably get me to interview them. Now, within the interview process, I think you can also relate to this. How they interview is also going to be extremely important, because at least for me, if I was to look at a hiring standpoint, I would really like to hear how or when the employee had actually failed at some point, and how they handle that. Because I think how we all handle failure is extremely important. Because for me, to a certain degree, did I technically fail at college? Technically, I did, right? Because I didn't complete it. But how I handled it was, I heavily went into my career trying to improve as much as I could. The hunger was there. So I think that would be one thing, would actually be a quite interesting question to hear, and how that employee answers it would be, how you handle failure, how you handled stress. Did you ever feel like there was times where you disagreed with someone at a higher level than you? What happened? Did it work out? Because that was actually, one of the questions I was asked during my Amazon interviews, and other top level tech company interviews that I've done in my time, where, again, the disagreement and failure was actually important. I actually loved answering that question in those interviews, and I felt like it kind of opened my interviewer's eyes at the time, and made me a very strong candidate for a lot of roles. But I think scope, relatability of the resume and your experience, and key wins and key points of interest that you as a candidate may think your employer is interested in. So the candidate needs to understand what they're applying for first. I think that's extremely important, but also how their career may relate. Maybe again, key points of interest and success are extremely important.
$1 billion company, like one of the most influential companies on planet Earth. And so there is, I'm sure people, kids come to you to and they're like, oh, I mean, you dropped out and then you are in Amazon. What, that's the height of career success, technically. I mean, people are looking at, okay, where does he work? He dropped out, is with Amazon. He dropped out, is with Microsoft. He dropped out, is with Google. What else? What's the point? so I so I can drop out too. Well, of course, maybe yes. But then what I really want you to talk about was what is the work involved? Because I feel like people don't typically talk about the work involved. If I go to your LinkedIn now, I'm going to see that you work with Amazon. So what is the level of work? What is the level of grit? What is the level of, how hard did you have to fight all the way from, because I know what is a supply chain associate is. I know that that's like the very beginning of the journey, and this is like all the way down to working with $1 trillion company, over $2 trillion company. So let's talk about the work involved in that whole journey, all the way down to this point.
Mentality is extremely important. I think work ethic is extremely important. Um, First off, when you talk about grit, I could say I definitely had it because I definitely pushed in my career. So when you talk about the work, well, first of all, I want to perform well in my role. Let's begin with that. I want to learn as much as required to succeed and be a good employee for the given role. But also, I want to take on responsibility. I want to take on scope. I want to be willing to fail, essentially, kind of understanding that ground to where I think that if people played a bit too safe in their career and their day to day responsibility, now everyone's different. That might be what's good for your life. But for me, where I was in a heavily attempting to grow phase of my career and growing my experience, I definitely try to take on more responsibility from my managers at the time, or potentially taking on bigger customers, or potentially trying to grow business with given customers. I can use Amazon fulfillment centers as a primary example where I eventually got handed the opportunity and grew the given account during my time at Fastenal. I did cold calls for not necessarily cold calls, but trying to introduce new product to the Amazon FCs that they may haven't ordered in a while, and try introducing new products, introducing different Fastenal vending services we had at the time, maybe re-optimizing the Fastenal vending machines to where more product would be readily available, but more dollars would be spent overall. So, for example, I'm not having useless product in there that's actually not being used or too much of it. Scaling the availability. I did everything I could to try to perform better in my roles. And then on top of that, when I left work, I did more research on my field, other companies I could go to, interesting roles I would be interested in, maybe potentially new emerging technology or skill sets, or maybe new services other companies are offering. Am I familiar with it? Do I think it's going to be popular at other companies? Is it going to grow? Do I want to be a part of it? I Work was work, and then outside of work was more work, essentially, as much research or studying as I could do. And I think, again, I really really liked the work and just learning in general. But I will say this: I'm not a particularly fast learner. I write a lot of notes. I reorganize a lot of notes. I probably ask questions at least a second time at a bare minimum, and I do more research on my own. So I think that also stems from, again, me just not being the quickest learner or the most talented person. So what I can really do is just grit and repetition, to be honest. Other people may learn things at a significantly faster pace. That's not me. I know my strengths and weaknesses, and learning extremely fast is not one of them.
The work was more work.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think that if you want to aim as high as you can, you need to think of your competition being at that peak. When you're applying for another role, you can't just assume that, oh, everyone's as good as me or I'm better than everyone else. My assumption is that I'm probably at the lower to mid bar of everything when I'm applying. So, how can I best, while I'm applying for this, make sure my resume stands out, my application stands out? But also, again, I'm always thinking, I try to have everything broken down over 2 years, and that's 8 quarters essentially of goals or things I can learn or improve in my current role, or maybe things I want to learn outside of role. It could be things tied to your career, or maybe personal goals you want to achieve. But I try to stay fairly goal orientated. Small achievable goals that leads to the bigger picture is the way I like to think of things, so I can improve. And again, I just try to learn as much skill sets required for my field as I can, and trying to identify those things is how you begin. So again, top skills required for your field, top skills required for the role you want to promote into. Maybe what am I missing? Because we're always missing a little bit of something, or we need to sharpen some type of tool in our toolkit. And that's something that we need to, I think myself, for example, needs to heavily emphasize and actively trying to improve on.
Carl, let's talk about in retrospect. If you were to start all over, would you go the traditional college route, or would you say, okay, you know what, let me just get into the world of work from day one? I mean, you literally already like spent, I'm not going to say wasted, about maybe 2 years in college before finally making that decision. But in retrospect, would you go, the traditional college route, or would you just start all over from the world of work after high school? Why or why not? What are the pros and cons from both sides? I mean, I feel like you've been on both sides. You try to go the traditional way, and then you're like, you know what? Let me go try this, and then you finally go one way. So, what are the pros and cons you're seeing from?
Very different answers. If I was to stick in software engineering versus if I was to stay in supply chain. So let's go, back to if I was to stay strictly in software engineering. One thing I would have done that I did not do at the time, and I wish I did, was I didn't research all the tools available for me to learn or take courses outside of school at the time. So Udemy, for example, or maybe YouTube tutorials and things like that. I did not use as much of the internet at that time as I could have, or research as much as I could have from my career. So honestly, had I just taken courses outside of the college realm of paid courses or trainings and things like that, I probably would have been more interested and would have actually stayed in college and maybe at least gotten my associate's degree or potentially gotten my bachelor's at the time. But I definitely needed some type of stimulus outside of the classroom, and I didn't do that. And it's definitely a drop on my part for not doing enough research and not being open minded enough. So that's something that I emphasized heavily more later in my career. So that's a mistake I identified looking back, that I should have done more research. And that's why I always emphasize research and skills required, the job market, things like that, tools I could use to improve. And I did not do that. And that's something I've since corrected in my career. And then the second answer would be, if I was to go back and stay in college and finish, maybe I would have went in supply chain or business, as that's kind of my career focus now. Supply chain, business, maybe project management would probably be where I would definitely say I would have been more likely to finish my career, my college career, and get my bachelor's degree or whatever degree at the time. But yes, those would be the two best answers I can give if I was to stick either in software engineering or go on the path of leaving that and going into supply chain or business, for example. I would have more likely have completed my degree at the time had I done those things. But what's happened. All we can do is give that advice to other people in that position, right?
Advice your kid to do?
Oh man, I want kids,
are
but
you are
oh
you gonna
man,
tell him but go to school, but Honey's gonna say, but dad, you didn't go to school?
I'm already preparing for that answer. To be honest, I've had some of my younger cousins genuinely ask me if they can drop out, and my answer is always no. Don't do it. And the reason why I say no, don't do it, it's because of the mentality. Okay, I don't know how much work they're really wanting to put in. Now, while a degree is costly and time consuming, it definitely does help in someone's working career, especially when they're beginning their career. So for me, when my parents kept telling me to stay or go back, you couldn't tell me nothing, James. There was no way I was going back because I thought of it as a very simple and funny way of I'm not being paid to go to school, but at work I'm being paid, right? So it was a very funny conversation. It probably wasn't so funny for my parents. I don't think they were too happy initially. I think they were just worried. I think my parents were just worried. Luckily enough for for my career, I had my parents' support. But I think once they saw the success start coming in and the job offers that came my way and the opportunities, and I think they were a bit more confident in my decisions, especially when the Amazon offer came. My parents were so happy for me, and I was happy to showcase that. Hey, I'm making it further in my career. I'm not yet where I want to be. I'm still trying to go further, but at least I'm making strides. And you know, when you get to because Amazon is a company I always wanted to work for. Let me preface that. So when I finally got there, it's like I attained one of the goals I had for my career. But it was good for me to showcase that grit and work ethic can at least take you to the realm of where you want to go and it can take you further. I heavily emphasize that to my younger cousins and family and friends and whatnot that the work ethic will definitely bring you there. It definitely shows, and I'm a primary example of that, even without a degree. But it does take work ethic. I think that's something I try to emphasize to my younger cousins. That man, you guys didn't see the extra hours I put in at work, or the hours I studied at home, or some of the projects I failed on, or some of the times I didn't perform well. Um, so that's something I try to emphasize. But yes, when you talk about my future kids, oh man, stay in school. Don't drop out like I did. Don't do it, man. I feel like what I put my parents through, dropping out of college the first time, leaving Fastenal as a branch operations manager. When I was performing well at the time, which actually ended up causing a 1.5 year career gap because I was trying to find new careers, new industries. I was studying. I was thinking if I want to get my certificates done, whether or not I want to go back to school. I thought of everything, right? And I ended up getting a contract role as an inventory analyst through Ashton Carter for a company called Blue Diamond Growers, an almond roasting company. So I worked as a contractor there for about 7 months from October 2023 through May 2024. And I was performing well, loved the team. I remember my manager heavily wanted me to stay, but I was like, no, I know exactly what I want to do for my career. I'm going to leave this contract actually a little bit earlier than what they wanted me to. And then at that time, it was hilarious because I remember coming home, James, and telling my parents, "Oh yeah, because my brother's." So this is it closer towards April in 2024, about a month before I left. Telling my parents, "Oh, I think May whatever date is my last day." And I remember my mom was like, "What do you mean it's your last day?" I was like, "Oh, I'm done. My contract. I'm going to leave my contract early." And they were like, "Oh my God, he's going to be unemployed again," because the job market in 2024 last year, wasn't the best, right? It's not as bad as it is now, but it wasn't the best. And I remember my grandparents being worried, like, "Oh my God, he's going to be homeless. He doesn't know what he's going to do. He's going to be unemployed for another year." And then yeah, I probably caused a lot of stress for my parents and grandparents, being unemployed for periods of time, leaving jobs without jobs solidified in line. But again, I had the support, but also I had the grit that I was willing to push through. Because again, maybe maybe having a supportive parent or supportive network, if I didn't have that, I would have made different decisions, right? But those cards were luckily by the blessed, whatever, the cards were in my hands. So I knew that if I played them correctly, I could get further, But had I not had that, probably would have made different decisions. Maybe I would have stayed at Fastenal longer. Maybe I would have stayed at Blue Diamond longer. Uh, but the cards that were in my hands is what I had, so I played them the best I could.
That's exactly what I wanted to also talk about next, like the role of all of these stakeholders. But just to remind everyone, if you're joining us, feel free to follow my Career Chronicles channel and tap on the bell icon. We always bring the best of young professionals here to talk about their career journey. I mean, these are real stories you cannot find on their LinkedIn page. I pride about bringing people here to talk about a part of their career that you're not going to find on their LinkedIn. So, yeah, follow us and then turn on your notification and then drop any question you have. Carl, let's talk about like the role of these stakeholders. You have roots from Asia. and I have roots from Africa, Nigeria precisely. And we can all agree that where we have roots from, it's not just some of those places where you can just wake up and you know what, I'm dropping out of college. These are like, so you talked about your mom getting freaked out because, these are like cultural things that we believe that this is like a pathway towards this thing. And again, these are stakeholders in your life that, one way or the other, they are stakeholders in your life. They have a say in your life. So how were you? I know you're still doing it till today because I know you talk about your grandmom calling you, telling you, "Oh, are you going to go back to school?" So the question really is, how are you managing these stakeholders in the midst of all of this? I mean, one of the things there is, I mean, show success. I mean, I imagine you showing them your Amazon offer. You're like, you know what? Look here, I got to Amazon. Look at it right here. No, but then on a general note, how have you been managing like these stakeholders in your life, like family, friends, all of those stakeholders that would rather want you to go this way, but you like have chosen to go this way instead? How are you managing all of that?
let's let's begin to before getting to Amazon, right? Maybe a time when I was unemployed. Well, first off, I always let them know that I'm actively looking for my career and actively doing research, actively interviewing. I'm not just sitting at home. It may seem like that because I am at home all the time, but I was always interviewing for companies, doing as much research as I can, studying as much as I could, doing as much research, anything I could to reassure them that I'm actively trying. I'm not just sitting at home trying to freeload that. And then I think that luckily over my life, my parents and grandparents have known that I'm willing to put the work in. It's just maybe a little bit unconventional from what they're used to because my grandparents not having maybe a super formal education to my parents having immigrated to America when they were in their early teens at the time and then having to start school then and getting their high school degrees. I believe only my mom has a college degree, and not my dad. But I education was heavily emphasized, and I wasn't the best student in either high school or college. I will say that I was probably a 2.0 GPA student on my best day, because again, my interest of learning inside the classroom, James, that's the one thing I could never fix, man. I just never had interest. Could I perform well? Sure, I could perform decent, but man, my interest wasn't there, dude. I remember as a kid hiding grade reports that would come up to the house. So, so I would I would hide grade reports, man, as a kid growing up. Dude, I was so mischievous because I knew they were terrible, dude. Oh my god. Like I'm not talking about like
Good things.
oh man, like just dude, I just couldn't pay attention in class. But when it came to like hands-on project, or at least specifically, maybe math curriculum, I performed a lot better in compared to everything else. But just as a general sense, I couldn't pay attention in the classroom. And then eventually that led to me dropping out of college, which again stressed out the parents and grandparents. But luckily, work was always available to me during my working career fairly early. I could stay in a role for 5 years and kind of grow my career, get experience. But I also, again, reassured my parents and grandparents I always had a plan. I'm learning this. I stuck in this career field. These are the companies I'm looking at, and they probably, were like, sure, sure, just keep working. But as a backup, if you need to go back to college, just go back. You know, um, which was something that was always emphasized that I should go back. But I'll tell you, James, there was 0% chance I was going back to college. That wasn't going to happen, man. No, the older I got and the further into my career I went, there was zero chance I was ever going back. Because also there's a bit of pride and a bit of pride and ego there. I want to showcase that it can be done without the degree, right? Now, should people do it? I don't know. That's up to each individual's person's life and decisions. And I think that, when you mentioned stakeholders and how I handle them, like college, for example, right? I think that people can always go back because it's always going to be there. But there are certain situations where maybe people need to work a period of time to know whether or not they want to go back or to have enough money to pay for college or things like that. So there's going to be various situations. But when you talk about my family, my key stakeholders, I always tried to reassure them that I had a plan and that I was going to put in the work. And then yeah, and then it happened. And then funny enough, James, when I did get the role to move for Amazon and did get the role to move from from California to Seattle, right? Seattle, Washington, which I've never even been to Washington. I remember coming downstairs, being so happy. My parents were happy. My grandma comes out. She was happy for me, and she said, "Where's the roll at?" Because I should, my grandparents have lived with me for almost my whole life, and I was like, "Oh, it's in Seattle, Washington." She goes, "That far? You're leaving?" I was like, "Yeah, you wanted me to put in the work, right, and get into a big company. I did." And I think she was a bit sad and devastated that while I succeeded, she wasn't expecting me to leave so far. And I remember her saying, "When are we leaving?" Who is we, right? Who is we? Like, no, that's not what's happening. So I think reassurance, showcasing that I had a plan, and just overall putting in the work reassured my family, friends, and even my coworkers, who I consider friends now, and really close to me now. It's just knowing that I'm going to put in the work and knowing I have a plan.
What's one career myth you want to bust today about people without a college degree in their career? What's the myth?
Okay, now let me just say this isn't for every field, right? But I think that it's not necessarily a myth. It's pretty much known now that it's not every degree is required for your field. Now, does it help? Does it get you looks, especially if you're in a big Ivy League school or things like that? Um, can it help? Sure, but not every field requires a degree. Now, you may start at a lower level entry point. That's fine, right? For you to build your career set and grow up in. Or maybe there's not degrees that you require for a field, but maybe there's certificates you can get, or things like that that actually help you with your career. Whether it's like a Six Sigma or a CSCP, for example, or a PMP or CAPM, for example, that you can get throughout your career that'll help. That's not exactly a college degree. There are things like that. There are things aside from a degree you can get, or skill sets you can get that'll help you get your foot in the door, which will help you grow your career. But uh, I wouldn't, yeah, I don't think a degree is required for every single field out there. It definitely wasn't required for supply chain, but I would say that it's not required. But while it's not required, I think again, each individual person's own responsibility, key of research, willing to take an entry level role, willing to build their way up, things like that is going to be heavily required to even give you a chance to succeed. It's not a guarantee, it's just a chance, right?
Okay, yeah, I like the way you put it. Yeah, it's like you just need to get your foot in the door, and then, like you rightly said, not every career, not every role requires a degree. And then it's your responsibility to find out those roles, and then, how you want to navigate that whole process. We pride ourselves as the podcast where we bring people to talk about the part of their career that you cannot find on LinkedIn. What is that one thing about your career that is not public knowledge? No, sometimes this is always embarrassing, but then it is what it is.
Amount of times I've probably failed at certain things, man. The amount of times that I haven't performed well, that I tried to correct mistakes or improve on, or maybe when I expanded my scope a bit too quick and maybe I dropped the ball on certain things. That definitely doesn't show on the LinkedIn profile, the resume itself. Now, do I bring it up in interviews? Sure, because I think it's also very funny, but also how I improved upon and identified those given mistakes. But oh yeah, for example, there's one funny example to where I failed. My inventory caused me to fail back-to-back inventory audits during my time at Fastenal, which I believe at the time caused a district-wide inventory audit because my branch and related to my inventory for Amazon, it it caused an inventory audit failure. So the very first time that it happened, related to this specific branch, it wasn't necessarily my mistake, but it was my inventory. So I should have managed it. I should have double checked it. A fellow employee had double received in a product, when they shouldn't have. So technically, we had double the levels required. Now, the auditor just happened to come that day and identify that given product and realize that, hey, you have substantially more of this product, significantly amount more dollars. And there was a threshold that we couldn't go past. And we did. And so that audit failed. I remember, okay, that's fine. My district manager came by at the time. I was like, hey, you just make sure you get dialed in for the next time because they're going to re-audit. And I remember I remember saying, hey, I've never failed two audits in a row. So we get to the second audit. I definitely dropped the ball on cycle counting and keeping double checking the inventory levels for all of my product. There was one key product where I believe maybe due to recent POs placed or for whatever reason, the inventory levels were off. Now this one was definitely my responsibility, my mistake, right? And I had failed the audit by I think quite a large margin. Now, yeah, so I actually did fail two audits in a row, which was again, you know, unfortunate in the moment, but hilarious in retrospect, right? So I believe at the time that caused a district-wide inventory internal audit essentially for I think 6 or 7 or 8 other branches because of my mistake. And then so in my mind, I was like, well, I better make sure I pass this third audit. I don't think I want to fail 3 audits in a row. Luckily, again, I passed, but that was again that's a key moment that probably isn't it was definitely not seen on my resume, but in retrospect was hilarious. But it also emphasized that I needed better ownership on something. Now, so there are certain times where the mistake is out of our hands, but that second audit failure was 100% my responsibility, no one else's, and I didn't own that, and I didn't perform as well as I could have, and it caused a second audit failure.
Is that thing you wanted us to talk about that we didn't talk about? What's that question you thought I was going to ask that I didn't ask? Or what word do you want to put out there for everyone watching this right now that you would probably see this again in the next 5 years, in the next 1 year, maybe when you become a director, or maybe when you were running your own company. Who knows? It's really a small world.
Can't think of any off the top of my head, but one thing I would always want to emphasize for anyone that's been in my position now. So I'm 28, turning 29 this year. So I'm getting to that point to where I'm hitting the peak of my career at that standpoint, getting very close to it, or getting close to where my career grows exponentially. I will say that anyone beginning their career or maybe juggling college, maybe within the first 3 to 5 years of their working experience or working career, I want to heavily emphasize anyone that's listening, or maybe my family that eventually watches this, is that do as much research as you can, expand your scope as much as you can, and be willing to work and improve outside of work and the classroom. So, on your own time where it matters most, but also where you have the chance of being lazy with no consequences. I think that when you use that readily available, quote unquote, free time, and you invest in yourself, because, we're always, us as people, are always the best investment. We can always invest in ourselves to just learn, expand your scope, ask as much questions in the classroom, ask as much questions in the work environment, but also maybe network a little bit. Ask people around you, find people related in your career, maybe find people going through similar situations. Maybe try to find people with success stories that did what you're attempting to do. But also, again, while it's really good to find things you would love to do in your career, right? Maybe try to identify a few things that you feel like you would perform worst in, that you don't want to do in your career. Maybe you don't want as a primary responsibility. I think that when people identify things that they don't like, it gives them reassurance. Okay, I don't want to do anything related to this field. Or they might second guess themselves and thinking, maybe I haven't done enough research. Maybe I might like that, and you might have discovered something that you would not have thought of, because again you were only initially doing research based off of things you would like, or that's glamorous, or things that you didn't think about. So that's why I heavily emphasize people that if you can't think of what you want to do, first identify the things, tasks, fields, or whatever that you don't want to work in, that you heavily don't want to do, and that may open your eyes that maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm wrong about the things I don't like, James. So I think that'll open up your mind a bit more.
Don't want to do already, like at least the ones to eliminate. At least. And as we round up, Carl, coffee or tea? I mean, I know the answer. Coffee or tea? That's always my last question.
Yeah. Twice on Sundays, exactly. Good, my friend.
Carl, thank you very much for your time. And this was a very, insightful conversation. And I think I also got to learn so much about you, learn so much about your career, and I know that this is going to be very helpful and valuable to everyone that will be seeing this. And yeah, thank you. And it was great talking to you, Carl.
That maybe I'll be a guest again in 2 or 3 years. Maybe our careers would have changed, for the best, right? For the best.
Bye.
All right, bye, James. Thank you, everyone, for watching. This will be fun to look back on.
All right, sir.